Alright, so let's talk about NBA history in this video. Now, I'm going to show you guys something that, in my opinion, proves that the NBA hasn't actually gotten better. Now, I can dive deeper into that topic, but before I do, make sure you like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thank you for 513 subs. I'm going to try to get to 520 subs this week, if it's plausible. I think it is. But I would really appreciate it. Now, that being said, let's just get started. Now, I'm going to title this, well, I'm not going to title this video that, but I'm going to call this the lineal greatness, right? Or the best player's lineage or something like that. Now, I'm getting this idea or this title from boxing. Anybody who watches boxing knows that there's a lineal champion, right? Which I'm just using this as an example. Obviously, I'm going to dive deeper into basketball, but as you can see, like the lineal world champion, right? You can see the best fighter of the generation or for a period, like Sonny Liston in 1962-64 fought Muhammad Ali, who was the best fighter until Joe Frazier beat him, and then Foreman beat Frazier, and then Ali beat Foreman, and Leon Spinks beat Ali, and then Ali beat Spinks, and then he retired, and then Holmes had it, and then Spinks had it, or Michael Spinks, and vice versa. They fight each other. The best fighters of the world, or the best fighter of a certain era or whatever, fights the next best fighter, and that's how we call the lineal champion. Obviously, you can see these all fighters are all great. And now Alexander Usyk is the current lineal world champion. But the point that I'm making is in basketball, there's a lineage as well, because most great players play great for about 10 to 13 years through all eras, right? Comparing them through eras. Now, recently, they've been playing, it's easier for them to play 20 years or 15 years. So this will be even more true going into the future. But even in the past, it's true. For example, if we were to start with Bill Russell started his NBA career in 1957 and retired in 1969. Now, in his career, he obviously played Wilt, who both of them had a case to be the best player in the world throughout the 60s, right? And so that's one thing. But they also played the exact same amount of, the same players in the NBA because they played in the NBA together and each other. And so there's that connection where you're like, okay, right? That's why we don't discredit Wilt through eras when we compare him to Bill Russell. We talk about different things. Now, interesting enough is Kareem. Now, Kareem is technically the glue guy because he played so many years in the NBA. He played like 20, so he's the glue guy. But Kareem was able to play against Wilt, Hakeem, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan, right? Which is insane. Think about that. Kareem, as a player, played against Wilt Chamberlain in the 60s and early 70s. Hakeem in the mid 80s. But Bird in the early 80s and throughout the 80s, I guess. And Michael Jordan. Now, not once has anyone ever discredited Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's, opposition or opponents. Everybody knows he played against great players because we can see them. But one thing I want to establish is Kareem was way better in the 70s than he was in the 80s. Now, he was still pretty darn good in the 80s, don't get it twisted, but he was way better in the 70s, yet nobody discredits him because they were able to see him play against people like Michael Jordan. And we have footage that shows you that Kareem, even at that age of 40 and 39, 38, 39, 40, whatever, was still pretty darn good, even though he wasn't moving as well and he was limited, or not limited, but he wasn't involved on offense as much as he was when he was younger. Now, why am I showing you this? And by the way, there's more players. Like I can bring up Dr. J, who played against Wilt Chamberlain, who played against Hakeem, Kareem, Magic, Larry Bird. I can bring up those players. Moses Malone would be another good one who played for a long time. People forget he retired in 1995. So he played against Shaq. He played against Kareem, Hakeem, Magic, everybody. Right? I can bring up a lot of players. But the point that I'm getting at is if Wilt, if Wilt's the best player in the world from 1960 to 1969, right, and then Kareem becomes the best player in the world from 1970 till 1982 or whatever year he stopped being the best player in the world, right, then how in the world is Wilt Chamberlain's era inferior to Kareem's if, right, when Wilt and Kareem played each other, Wilt outplayed Kareem in the playoffs at times, right? And now this is where it gets even better. If Kareem stopped being the best player in the world in 1982, for example, let's just say that's the year he stopped being the best player in the world, maybe 1981. But let's just say that was the year. How could you say that Hakeem is a better player than Bill Russell or Wilt Chamberlain if Hakeem, right, in 1980-something, whatever, was still getting the business from Kareem, right? Kareem was still giving him issues. And the only reason Hakeem was a better player at that point, and this is the reality, was age. Kareem was out of his prime. right? It wasn't like Hakeem had all the skill in the world, which he did, right? It wasn't that. That wasn't the difference between them. The difference was age. And so you can go on and on. For example, Michael Jordan was the best player in the world while Magic was in the NBA. He was the best player in the world while Shaq and Tim Duncan were in the NBA. So you would never say Tim Duncan played better opposition than Larry Bird. Now, if you start looking at the year differences, obviously from the 1960s to the 80s is 20 years. From the 80s to the 2000s is 20 years. Yet we talk about the 60s like if it was from like it was 100 years ago, right? But every generation plays against the future generation, and they usually play really good. The only difference that comes around is when they start aging out. When Tim Duncan got older, right, in let's say 2012, he didn't look the same as young Tim Duncan. But it wasn't because he didn't have the talent or the ability. It was because he was getting older, right? Same thing with Shaq. Shaq didn't look as good as at the end of his career. But it wasn't because he was a trash can, or not skilled, but it was because he was older, right? Same thing with Kobe. Kobe had the injuries that made him look worse at the end of his career. Now, LeBron is someone a little bit different who hasn't looked too bad recently because he doesn't seem to age now. Why is that? I don't know. But like same thing with Curry. Curry's eventually going to start slowing down in theory. Now, I do think it's a lot easier for players today to play longer just because the way the NBA plays. But the point is, like, if Victor Wembanyama becomes the best player in the world in the next couple years, and people look at him and go, well, he's better than Michael Jordan or whatever, there's that lineage between players that protects them and says, no, like, these players were good enough to compete with these players who were good enough to compete with those players, and so on. Right? And that, in my opinion, is one of the strongest evidences that the NBA hasn't actually gotten better. Now, that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this little video. God bless you. Jesus loves you. I'm pretty exhausted. I've been talking too much in these last, 7.5 minutes or whatever long. Jesus loves you. Remember that. And I hope you guys get saved. And thank you.